This is my true story. For 25 years, my family believed my younger brother was dead. They said he was passed away in the war. The government sent medals, condolences, and papers with seals. We buried an empty box because there was no body to bury. I grew old thinking I'd never see him again. Then, last week, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, I saw a face I thought only existed in photographs. My knees went weak. I couldn't speak. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It was 1978. The air smelled like iron and diesel that morning. My younger brother David had been called to the border post. He was only 21, full of energy, always smiling, never serious until that day. I remember helping him fold his uniform. He laughed when I told him to be careful. He said he'd be home before the month ended. Mother packed his favorite biscuits in a tin. Father handed him a small Bible, and I stood by the gate pretending not to cry. When the army truck arrived, it kicked up clouds of dust that stung my eyes. He climbed onto the back, waved once, and shouted something I couldn't hear over the engine. Then the truck turned the corner, and that was the last time we saw him. A month later, a telegram came. I remember the knock on the door, sharp and heavy. Father opened it, and a man in uniform handed him a yellow envelope. The paper inside said, "Missing in action." Just 3 words, typed and stamped. Mother read it once and fainted. I held her head as Father sat on the floor, staring at the wall. He didn't cry. He just sat there, holding that paper like it was poison. For days, the house was silent. No one cooked. No one talked. Even the clock on the wall seemed louder, ticking through a grief we couldn't name. We waited for news. The neighbors came, bringing food we couldn't eat. The priest visited and prayed. Weeks passed. Then the army sent another letter, this time saying his unit had been ambushed. Several soldiers confirmed he was seen last during a gunfire exchange. No one could find his body. Officially, he was declared dead. Presumed fallen in service. Those were the words printed under his name. They sent a small wooden box wrapped in a flag. Inside were his dog tags, some burned photos, and a torn piece of his uniform. Mother kissed the cloth like it was holy. Father buried the box behind the house under the mango tree. After that, everything changed. The laughter left our home. Father stopped working at the factory for months. Mother would sit by the window every evening, staring down the road where the army truck had gone. I was 25 then. I tried to be strong, but there's no strength that can compete with hope that refuses to die. Every morning, I'd check the mailbox, just in case another letter came. One that said it was a mistake, that he was alive somewhere. It never came. We built our lives around that empty space where he used to be. I moved out eventually, but never stopped visiting my parents. Every December, on his birthday, I'd light a candle by the photo on the wall. Him in uniform, smiling. It became routine. Grief, when it stays long enough, becomes part of the furniture. You stop crying. You just remember. When I got married, my wife placed that same photo on our living room shelf. Our kids grew up thinking Uncle David was a story. I told them about him the way people talk about legends. Brave, young, gone too soon. I meant every word because that's all we had left. The war ended, years passed, and the world moved on. But in my mind, that truck was still driving away, still turning that corner. Some nights, I'd wake up thinking I heard his voice. I'd tell myself it was just a dream. Other times, I'd dream of finding him somewhere far away, unable to speak, waiting for me to bring him home. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was never knowing. A death you see, you can mourn. A disappearance, you just learn to live beside. For 25 years, that's what I did. I carried the memory of his last smile everywhere I went. I saw it when I looked at my own son, when I walked past soldiers in uniform, when I stood at parades. I'd clap for the heroes and wonder which of them saw him last. And so, for 25 years, my brother remained 21 in my mind. Young, brave, frozen in time. I thought that's how it would always stay, until last week, when everything I believed shattered with 3 slow knocks on my front door. After the telegram came, the world slowly rebuilt itself around the idea that he was gone. The army sent official documents, stamped with seals and signatures. They delivered a medal wrapped in a blue case and a condolence letter signed by a man who had never met my brother. They called him a hero, but that word didn't make the house any less empty. Mother placed the medal beside his photo on the mantel. She'd dust it every morning as if it were alive. Father put the government letter in a drawer he never opened again. For a while, I thought maybe I should have burned it. Maybe it would hurt less if there wasn't proof on paper. But proof was all we had, and it was the wrong kind. The years that followed were long and quiet. There's something strange about living with presumed dead. It's not final like a funeral, but it's not hopeful either. It's like being stuck in a room with a door that never opens or closes. We tried to move on, but there was always a part of the house that still waited for him. His room stayed untouched for years. The bed remained made, the books stayed on the shelf, and his army jacket hung on the back of the door like he'd come home any minute. Mother never let anyone touch it. She said it kept his scent. Even when the smell faded, she still believed it was there. Father became different after that. He stopped laughing, stopped talking about the future. Most evenings, he'd sit on the porch staring into the distance with that look of quiet defeat. The kind that doesn't cry or shout, it just waits. He died in 1990, still waiting. At his funeral, I placed David's dog tags in his coffin. It felt right. He always said he'd protect his family. Now, at least, he was doing it in spirit. After Father died, Mother moved in with me. Her body grew weaker every year, but her faith stayed strong. She never said, "My son died." She always said, "My son went missing." She refused to use the word dead. Every December 14th on his birthday, she'd light a candle under his photo and whisper, "Come home." I used to think it was just her way of coping, but sometimes I caught myself doing the same thing, talking to that photograph like it could hear me. The government stopped sending updates after a while. The war had ended, the records were closed, and new conflicts had taken over the news. Life moved forward, even if we didn't. The world forgot my brother, but we couldn't. His name stayed on the memorial wall at the Veterans Cemetery, carved between hundreds of others. I visited it once a year, tracing the letters with my fingers like they were skin. My own children grew up hearing his story so often that they began to treat it like a family legend. They'd ask, "What was Uncle David like?" And I'd tell them about his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he used to sneak cookies before dinner. They'd listen politely, but I could tell it sounded like a fairy tale to them, something distant, unreal. For them, he was a photograph, not a person. As the years passed, I learned to live with that dull ache of unfinished grief. It stopped hurting sharply. It just sat inside me like a stone that never moves. I'd see soldiers on TV returning home from new wars, families crying with joy, hugging sons they thought they'd lost. I'd change the channel. I told myself those stories were for other people. Our story had ended long ago. When Mother passed away in 2003, she still kept his photo by her bed. I buried her beside Father, and on her tombstone, I engraved both their names, and under them his. Beloved son, missing but never forgotten. That was my final act of closure, or at least, I thought it was. I truly believed I would never see that face again outside of old photographs. For 25 years, every piece of paper told me he was gone. Every grave visit, every empty birthday, every quiet night confirmed it. You start to trust the silence after a while. You convince yourself that the truth is what the documents say. But the truth doesn't always live in the files. Sometimes it hides in the places no one checks anymore. And that's what I learned the moment he appeared at my door. Everything I had believed, signed, and accepted for 25 years turned into dust with one knock. After a few years, the world adjusted to his absence like it adjusts to a missing limb, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. Life doesn't stop for the dead, even when the dead might still be alive somewhere. We learned to fill the spaces he left behind with routine. The photo of him in uniform stayed on the mantel, and every visitor would glance at it and say the same thing. He was a good man. They said it like a period at the end of a sentence that would never continue. His name became something people used gently, like a word that could break if spoken too loud. Our parents never truly recovered. They went through the motions of living, but their eyes always searched crowds, always turned toward uniforms, always waited for footsteps that never came. Father started aging faster after the 5th year. He'd go to veterans' offices every few months, asking questions, hoping for updates. Every time he came home, I could see the disappointment etched deeper into his face. By the 10th year, he stopped asking. Mother, though, never stopped believing. She'd say, "One day the door will knock," and every time the mailman came, her shoulders would stiffen, hoping it was news. It never was. When Father died, the light went out of her completely. She smiled less, talked less, and started living only in memories. She kept his room exactly the same: bed made, boots under the chair, a stack of letters he'd written before leaving for war. I once suggested she should let go, maybe pack some things away, but she said, "If I move anything, how will he find his way back?" So nothing changed. Dust covered everything, but she didn't care. She called it his silence. Family gatherings were the hardest. Weddings, birthdays, holidays. There was always a moment where someone would pause, stare at the empty seat and say, "If only David were here." Then everyone would nod quietly, and the conversation would move on. It became a ritual, a small act of collective grief that we all participated in without even realizing. After so many years, the sadness wasn't sharp anymore. It was background noise, always there, humming softly under every laugh. When I had children of my own, they grew up hearing his name like a legend. "Your Uncle David was brave," I'd tell them. "He fought for his country." They'd ask if I missed him, and I'd just say, "Every day." My wife used to say that sometimes she felt like there was a third person living in our house, not in body, but in memory. His presence hung in the air, silent but constant. As time passed, the world changed. New wars, new governments, new generations. But his absence stayed the same. Even as technology advanced and records became digital, his name stayed frozen in the archives under "missing in action." I checked once, years later, out of curiosity. Nothing had changed. The file was the same, the date, the unit, the word presumed. It was all still there, like a scar that refuses to fade. Our parents died believing their son was buried somewhere in foreign soil. They never knew the truth, that their boy was alive, suffering somewhere, waiting for a rescue that never came. That thought haunts me even now. How different their final days could have been if that one message, that one confirmation, had arrived just a little earlier. I sometimes visit their graves and imagine telling them, "He made it home." It's a comfort that came too late. After they were gone, the rest of the family did what families always do. They moved on. My children grew up, had families of their own. His name became a story they told to their kids. Great Uncle David, the soldier who never came back. The photo on the mantel was replaced by new ones. Weddings, graduations, birthdays. His frame stayed there, but it got pushed to the side, half-shadowed, almost forgotten. I didn't move it. I couldn't. Every time I looked at it, I saw the promise I made to myself. If he ever came back, I'd be the one to open the door. And that's what happened. 25 years later, just when everyone had stopped looking, the door I thought would stay quiet forever came alive with 3 slow knocks. The sound didn't feel real at first. But when I opened it and saw his face, older, thinner, but unmistakably him, I realized something. Grief might make you forget how to hope, but it never kills the part of you that's waiting. It was a normal evening, the kind that passes without notice. The air was cool, the street quiet, the television murmuring softly in the background. I had just finished dinner and was cleaning the table when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not hurried, not timid, just firm enough to make me look up. At first I thought it was a neighbor or a delivery man. No one really knocks on doors anymore, not in this neighborhood. Most people call first. But the sound came again, steady and patient. Something about it felt strange, almost heavy. I wiped my hands, walked to the door, and opened it. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The porch light flickered, and the man standing there looked like a ghost I had seen too many times in dreams. He was thinner, older, his face marked with deep lines and weathered skin. His hair was gray at the sides, his clothes plain, his posture stiff. But his eyes, those were the same. The same sharp brown eyes I had seen every day in the framed photo on my mantel for 25 years. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. He looked at me like a man seeing sunlight after years underground. No words came out of his mouth at first. He just stood there, gripping the old metal railing like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Then, slowly, his lips moved, and in a voice hoarse and cracked, he said, "Hello, brother." My knees gave out, and I had to grab the doorframe to stay standing. Every sound around me disappeared. The TV, the crickets outside, even my own breathing. I just stared at him, trying to understand what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. He was dead. For 25 years, I had lived with that fact. I had mourned him, buried his things, accepted the condolences. Yet here he was, alive, standing on my porch. The porch light flickered again, and that small movement made him flinch. It was then I realized something else. He wasn't just older. He was scared. Every movement was cautious, his eyes darting around like a man who hadn't felt safe in a long time. He carried a small, battered duffel bag on his shoulder. It looked like it had seen decades of travel. His hands were rough, covered in scars, the nails chipped and dark. I finally stepped forward, slowly, like I was approaching something fragile. I wanted to reach out, but I hesitated, afraid he might disappear if I touched him. "It's really you," I whispered, but even hearing my own voice felt strange. He nodded, barely, and that's when I noticed tears in his eyes. Without thinking, I pulled him into a hug. He stiffened for a moment, like he wasn't used to being touched, and then his whole body broke. His arms came around me weakly, and he started to shake. No words, just quiet, muffled sobs against my shoulder. I didn't cry right away. I was too stunned to feel anything. But when I felt his heartbeat against mine, something inside me gave way. The dam broke. I held him tighter and started crying too. Not the kind of crying that comes from sadness, but the kind that comes from disbelief. I don't know how long we stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. At some point, the porch light burned out completely, leaving us in the dim glow of the street lamp. Two old men, one who had been waiting his whole life, and one who had spent his life trying to come home. When we finally let go, he looked around like he didn't recognize anything. I could tell the world had changed too much for him. He stepped inside slowly, almost afraid. The house, the photos, even the smell. Everything must have felt like stepping into another lifetime. As he walked through the hallway, he stopped in front of the old framed picture on the mantel, the one that had kept him alive in our memories. He stared at it for a long time. His hand shook as he reached out to touch the glass. Then he looked at me again. His lips trembled, and all he said was, "I told you I'd come home." That's when the shock finally gave way to reality. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a trick. My brother, the man buried by paper and time, had found his way back after 25 years. The silence that had lived in this house for decades was broken, not by words, but by 3 quiet knocks. The moment I realized it was really him, I couldn't stop looking at his face. Every wrinkle, every scar, every twitch of his mouth carried a story I didn't yet know. His cheeks were sunken, his jaw sharper than I remembered, but under all that, I could still see the same boy who used to chase me around the yard, who laughed until he fell over, who promised he'd come back no matter what. Now he stood in front of me, trembling, half alive, half shadow. I had imagined this reunion 1,000 times, but never like this. Not with age, not with distance, not with so much silence between us. I stepped closer, my throat dry. When I wrapped my arms around him, I felt how thin he'd become. His bones pressed through the fabric of his jacket, and his breath shuddered against my shoulder. I expected him to cry, but he didn't at first. He just held me tight, like he was afraid I might vanish if he let go. Then, slowly, his grip started to shake. The sound that came out of him wasn't quite a sob. It was a sound of exhaustion, the kind of sound someone makes when they finally stop running after years. I don't know how long we stood like that. Maybe a minute, maybe longer. The world outside had gone still. I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock inside the house, the same one that used to drive him crazy as a kid. The neighbors' lights flickered on across the street. I knew some of them were peeking through their curtains. To them, it must have looked strange, two old men crying on a porch in the middle of the night. But I didn't care. For the first time in decades, the empty part of my life had shape again. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes were glassy but alert. He looked around the porch, at the plants, at the old swing we'd built as boys. He touched the railing, running his hand over the wood like he was remembering it through touch alone. His fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from habit, like someone who'd spent too long holding a weapon or sleeping on concrete. "Come inside," I said, though my voice barely came out. He hesitated, looking past me into the house. I realized he was nervous, maybe afraid of stepping into a home that no longer felt like his. I nodded gently, and that was enough. He stepped inside, one slow foot at a time. The living room looked almost the same as it did the year he left. The photo on the mantel, the couch we used to argue over, even the rug our mother insisted on keeping. He stopped near the mantel, staring at the photograph. He reached out with his rough, scarred hands and touched the frame. His lips pressed together, and he whispered something too soft to hear. I saw tears welling in his eyes again. This time, I didn't stop mine either. I guided him to the couch. He sat down like a man who hadn't rested in years. His body slumped, but his eyes kept moving, scanning everything: the clock, the curtains, the window. When his gaze met mine again, I saw something different there. Relief, fear, gratitude, all mixed into one tired look. I brought him a glass of water. His hands shook as he took it. He sipped slowly, like he was tasting the world again. For a few minutes, we said nothing. I just sat there studying him. The lines on his face told me everything words couldn't. He had lived a life I couldn't imagine, one built on survival, not comfort. I noticed small things. His knuckles were scarred, his left hand had a faint tremor, and his right eye blinked slower, like it had been injured once. I wanted to ask him where he'd been, what happened, how he got here. But I couldn't yet. I was afraid asking would break whatever fragile miracle had found its way home. After a while, he leaned back, exhaled deeply, and looked at the ceiling. "It smells the same," he murmured. I smiled weakly, not sure what to say. The same house, the same air, the same two brothers, sitting together again after 25 years of silence. When I reached over and gripped his hand, he gripped mine back instantly, strong and certain. For the first time in decades, I felt peace, real peace, not the kind you fake to survive. Outside, the night wind carried faint whispers through the trees. Inside, two brothers sat quietly, holding on to each other as if trying to make up for every lost year in a single breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, quiet, and deliberate, like each word cost effort. He sat on the couch, staring at the floor, his hands clasped together, thumbs rubbing against each other like a nervous habit. I didn't interrupt. I just waited. After a long silence, he began to explain. The words came slowly, as if dragged out from the deepest corner of his memory. He told me everything, or at least as much as a man could share after living through what he had. He said the day his unit went missing was nothing like what the official reports claimed. They had been sent into a remote valley during the final weeks of deployment, a zone no one wanted to enter. Communication failed halfway through, and an ambush hit them before dawn. He was injured, shot through the shoulder, but alive. The radio operator was killed instantly. By the time reinforcements arrived, only smoke and bodies remained. He was taken, not by his own side, but by the enemy. For years, he lived in a camp that officially didn't exist. No records, no contact, no rights. The men who guarded them treated them like they weren't human. He worked, hauled supplies, built roads, and tried to stay alive. The food was barely edible, the winters brutal, and disease took many of his friends. He said time stopped meaning anything after the first year. The only thing that kept him going was the thought of home. Our parents, me, the house, the promise he'd made to return. He tried to escape twice. The first time they caught him before he reached the forest. They broke his ribs and locked him underground for 2 weeks. The second time, he made it further, but was caught by a patrol and forced to watch others punished because of him. After that, he stopped trying, not out of fear, but out of guilt. He said he learned that survival sometimes means silence. Years later, when peace treaties were signed and prisoner exchanges took place, his camp was forgotten. The guards vanished, the prisoners scattered. Some were too sick to move. Others went mad. He followed a small group of survivors and crossed through mountains on foot. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to keep walking west. Eventually, they reached a border town. There, he found out something that broke him all over again. His name was on an official death certificate. He was declared dead by both armies. He tried to contact the embassy, but no one believed him. His documents were gone, his identity erased. When he told them his story, they said the file was closed, the case ended decades ago. No one wanted to reopen it. So he started over. A farmer gave him work in exchange for shelter. He stayed there, living under a different name, harvesting wheat and fixing fences. He lived like that for years, quiet, invisible, forgotten. He said there were nights when he sat alone in the fields, looking at the stars, wondering if we were still alive. Sometimes he'd dream of home, of the sound of our mother's voice calling us for dinner, of the creak of our porch swing, of me laughing when he couldn't catch a ball. Those dreams hurt more than the cold. They reminded him of what he'd lost. Eventually, through a veterans project decades later, a clerk found an old record of missing soldiers who were never properly verified. His fingerprints matched one of the files. They reopened his case quietly, verified his identity, and arranged his return. That was only a few months ago. The government officials were polite, but he said he could see the shame in their eyes. For them, it was paperwork. For him, it was 25 years of stolen time. When he finished speaking, the room fell silent again. I didn't move. I just looked at him, at his scars, his hands, his hollow eyes, and realized that the brother I lost had never really died. He had just been buried alive under the weight of war, bureaucracy, and neglect. He leaned back, sighed deeply, and said, "They forgot me, but I never forgot you." Then his voice broke. He covered his face with both hands, and I finally reached out and pulled him close again. There was nothing to say. Sometimes words can't fix what time destroys. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just my brother's return. It was the return of everything we'd lost: truth, memory, and the proof that hope doesn't die even when the world gives up on it. We sat in silence for a long time after he finished. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is remembering with you. He leaned back on the couch, eyes half closed, the weight of everything he'd said still hanging between us. I looked at him and tried to imagine what 25 years of living like that must have done to a person. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there before, small scars across his knuckles, and a distant look in his eyes that I couldn't read. He was home, but I could tell part of him was still out there, somewhere in that place he had escaped from. I thought about everything he'd missed: our parents' funerals, my wedding, the birth of my children, the years when I could have used a brother beside me. He should have been at my table, celebrating birthdays, arguing about politics, laughing at old memories. Instead, his life had been reduced to survival: meals in metal bowls, nights under a ceiling of dirt, years measured by pain. Every moment I had spent complaining about small things suddenly felt shameful. He had spent decades fighting just to stay alive, and I had been living in comfort thinking he was gone. He looked around the room like he was trying to connect two timelines: the past he remembered and the present he didn't recognize. He saw photos of my family, children he had never met, faces that carried his blood but not his memory. I introduced him to each one through the pictures. That's my daughter, that's my son, and those are their kids. He smiled faintly, but his eyes watered. I missed everything, he said quietly. I could see the regret in his expression, not bitterness, just sadness for all the ordinary moments that had passed him by. I tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, that none of it was, but he shook his head. He said what hurt most wasn't the pain or hunger. It was being erased. The world had moved on, built new wars, new heroes, new headlines. No one had waited for him. Even his name had been crossed off. When people forget you exist, he said, you start forgetting yourself. That hit me hard. I thought about how many times I'd looked at his picture and said out loud, he's gone. Each time I said it, maybe it had pushed him further away somehow, as if belief itself could bury a man deeper than soil. For 25 years, I'd been grieving a ghost who was alive, while he was living like a ghost who couldn't die. The hardest part was realizing that the people who loved him most, our parents, never got to see this moment. I imagined our mother's reaction if she had been the one to open the door. She would have screamed his name, probably fainted, then cried until she couldn't breathe. Our father would have stood silently behind her, eyes full of pride and disbelief. But they were gone. They died with a hole in their hearts that never closed. He'll never get to hold them again, and they'll never know their son kept his promise and made it home. That's a kind of loss that doesn't heal. As the night went on, we talked about smaller things, childhood stories, memories of the farm, the dog we had when we were kids. He remembered details I had forgotten. How we used to race to the creek after school, how father built us a treehouse, how mother would scold us for muddy shoes. He laughed softly while remembering, but there was always a shadow behind the laugh, like the memory hurt as much as it healed. At one point, he stood up and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet. He stared out for a while and said, "Everything looks the same, but it's not." I understood exactly what he meant. The world had moved forward without him. The country, the people, even the air felt new. He had been frozen in a time no one else remembered. I told him that we'd start again, that there was still time to build new memories. He nodded, though I could see doubt in his eyes. 25 years is a long time to lose, too long to fully get back. But at least now he had a home again. He had a bed, a roof, and a brother who wouldn't let him be forgotten twice. That night, when he went to sleep in the spare room, I stood at his door for a few minutes. He was already asleep, breathing quietly, like a man finally safe after decades of fear. I realized then that peace doesn't mean forgetting pain. It means surviving it long enough to see another sunrise. And he had. After 25 years, my brother was finally home. Word spread faster than I expected. It started with a call from a neighbor who worked at the local veterans office. Within 2 days, there were people from the media, government officials, and even old military officers reaching out. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. A soldier declared dead 25 years ago, standing alive in his brother's living room. The small town that had long forgotten our last name suddenly remembered it again. Cars started stopping in front of my house. Some came to see a miracle, others came out of guilt. They had written his obituary, given him medals, and closed his file. Now they had to face him. The first to arrive were 2 officials in dark suits. They carried folders, forms, and carefully measured expressions. They called it a reinstatement of record. My brother sat at the table while they apologized for administrative oversights and miscommunication during wartime. He didn't say a word for most of it. He just nodded and kept his eyes down, his hands folded neatly on the table. At one point, one of them said, "We're honored to have you back, sir." I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, not in pride, in irony. Honored. After 25 years of silence, they were honored now that he was useful again. Then came the cameras. A local journalist showed up first, asking if she could tell his story. Then more followed. National channels, war magazines, even foreign reporters. They wanted a photo of the soldier who came home. They wanted to capture a headline. I watched as he stood in front of the flag, wearing an old uniform the army had given him just for the pictures. The cameras clicked endlessly, flashes lighting up his tired face. He stood tall, chin up, shoulders square. The way he must have stood when he was young. But I could see the stiffness in his posture, the weariness behind the straight back. When it was over, he handed the uniform back neatly folded. "I don't need it," he said. "It belongs to the man they buried." The room went silent. Even the reporters didn't know what to say. I understood exactly what he meant. That uniform represented a version of him that the world had erased. A man who was full of hope, loyalty, and belief in duty. The man standing here was someone different now, someone the world didn't know how to categorize. After the reporters left, officials came again, this time with medals, certificates, and a promise of compensation for the years lost. They laid the medals on the table like offerings. He looked at them for a long time, then quietly pushed them aside. "Can you give me back the years?" he asked one of them. The man looked uncomfortable and said nothing. They left soon after. The medals stayed in the box, untouched. The story made national news that week. Soldier found alive after 25 years. The phones wouldn't stop ringing. Old friends, distant relatives, even strangers called to say how happy they were. Everyone wanted to be part of the story now. But none of them had been there during the years when his name was just a photograph gathering dust. None of them had seen what it took from him. The decades of isolation, the pain that came with every scar. He told me later that all the attention made him feel more like an artifact than a person. "They look at me like I'm history," he said, "not like I'm still here." He wasn't angry, just tired. He didn't want fame or money or parades. All he wanted was to sit at a table without fear, to sleep without nightmares, to walk down a street without flinching at loud sounds. He wanted peace, not applause. The government arranged a ceremony to honor his return. I convinced him to go, thinking it might bring closure. But when we got there, he stood on the stage, surrounded by people clapping for a story they didn't understand. I saw his hands shake as they handed him a folded flag. For everyone else, it was a celebration. For him, it was a reminder of everything that had been taken. After that day, he refused all interviews. He told me, "The war ended for them a long time ago. For me, it never did." And I realized that no matter how many medals they gave, no matter how many headlines they wrote, nothing could repay what he had lost. Not the years, not the family, not the life that was stolen in silence. The world had rediscovered him, but it would never truly know him. That night, when the last reporter left, he sat on the porch staring at the dark sky. I asked him what he was thinking. He said, "They all think this is a happy ending. But happy endings belong to people who never disappeared." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The world had given him recognition, but all he wanted was to live quietly, to finally exist without being a headline. After the noise faded and the journalists stopped calling, the house went quiet again. For the first time since his return, life began to feel normal, or at least something close to it. He stayed in the spare room at the end of the hall, the one that faced the garden. Every morning, I'd hear the same sound, the creak of the window opening, followed by a long, deep breath. He said he liked watching the sunrise. He told me it reminded him of the mornings before deployment, when the world still felt safe, when breakfast smells filled the house and the day hadn't yet turned into something uncertain. He started small, learning how to live again in a world that had moved 25 years ahead without him. The first week, he barely spoke. He just sat outside with a cup of tea, staring at the trees, trying to get used to silence that wasn't filled with orders or fear. The second week, he started walking around the block. The neighbors would wave, some awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Most of them had heard his story on TV. A few tried to thank him for his service, but he'd only nod politely. I could tell he didn't want gratitude. He just wanted to blend in, to feel like a person again. Every evening, we'd eat dinner together. He always asked about things that seemed small to me, how phones worked now, why cars didn't sound the same, how the grocery store had self-checkouts. It was like watching someone step into a future they were never meant to see. He'd look at my grandkids' toys with fascination, flipping them over in his hands like strange inventions. Once he saw a drone flying in the park and froze. His eyes widened, body tense, until he realized it was just a toy. I saw in that moment how deeply his past was still wired into him. The war had ended on paper, but it was still alive in his nerves. Over time, he began doing little chores around the house, fixing the leaky faucet, trimming the hedges, cleaning the garage. He said it made him feel useful. The doctors from the veterans' office came by a few times for checkups, offering therapy sessions and medication. He went once, but didn't go back. "I've had enough people asking me what I feel," he told me. "I just want to live what's left." And that's exactly what he tried to do. We made a habit of walking together every morning. We'd go to the park at the edge of town, where the trees arched over the path and the air smelled of wet grass. He'd walk slowly at first, his left leg still stiff from an old injury, but he refused to use a cane. He said he didn't want to look broken. Sometimes we'd sit on the same bench for an hour without speaking. We didn't need to. Just being there, side by side, was enough. At home, he spent hours going through old family albums. I'd find him at the table, flipping through pages, tracing the faces of our parents, of himself as a young man, of me in my youth. Sometimes he'd smile. Sometimes he'd quietly close the book and leave the room. I knew those pictures carried both comfort and pain. They were proof that life had gone on without him, but also that it still existed, waiting for him to rejoin it. Slowly, he started finding peace in small things. He planted tomatoes in the garden. He fixed the broken fence. He fed the stray cat that came by every night. He even learned how to use a smartphone, though he said it felt too clever for a simple man. What surprised me most was how gentle he became. The years had hardened him in some ways, but softened him in others. He was careful with every word, patient with every moment, grateful for every sunrise. Sometimes at night, I'd see him sitting by the window, staring out at the quiet street. His posture was calm, his face still, but his eyes never fully rested. I knew he was thinking about the men who didn't come back, about the years that no one could return to him. He never said it out loud, but I knew. He carried their memories like a weight he'd never put down. Still, he lived each day as though it were borrowed, with purpose, with quiet dignity, with no demands from the world. The war had taken his youth, his name, his place in time. But it hadn't taken his will to live. And now, sitting across from him every morning, sharing tea and silence, I realized something simple but powerful. He wasn't the same brother I lost. He was something stronger. He had come home, not just to the house, but to himself. It's been months now since that night he knocked on my door. Some mornings I still wake up expecting it all to have been a dream, expecting to find that the porch is empty, that the photo on the mantel is still just a picture of a boy who never came home. But then I hear the sound of the window opening down the hall, the soft creak of floorboards under his step, the kettle whistling as he makes his morning tea. And I know it's real. He's here. My brother, the man buried by war, by paperwork, by the world's indifference, is alive. Sometimes I watch him sitting in the garden, sunlight on his face, and I wonder how someone can lose everything and still carry themselves with such calm. He never complains. He never asks, "Why me?" He simply lives, as if every breath is borrowed from time itself. There's strength in that kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't shout or seek pity, but just endures. People call him lucky. I don't. Luck doesn't survive 25 years of being forgotten. What survives that is something else, something deeper, something human that refuses to die even when the world buries it. He told me once, "They made me disappear, but they couldn't erase me." I think about that often, because that's what war does. It erases names, families, histories. It leaves behind paperwork that says lost, presumed dead, and people are expected to move on. We build new lives, new routines, new versions of peace. But there are always ghosts, and sometimes, if you wait long enough, the ghosts knock back. Our parents never got to see this moment. That truth still hurts. I've imagined it 1,000 times. Mother running to the door, father standing behind her, tears in both their eyes. I think they would have aged backward in that instant. their grief turning into light. But life doesn't give you perfect reunions. It gives you what it can, when it can. My brother came back when there was no one left to welcome him but me. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was fate's way of keeping one promise, that someone would still be here to open the door. He doesn't talk about the war much anymore. The nightmares come and go. Some nights I hear him whispering names, sometimes in languages I don't understand. I don't wake him. I let him fight his ghosts quietly, the same way he survived them. In the morning, he always comes out calm, puts on a small smile and says, "It's a good day." It's such a simple phrase, but after everything he's been through, those 3 words mean more than anything. We don't take pictures. He doesn't want new headlines, doesn't want to be the man who came back again. The world already took enough from him. These days, we live small. We walk to the market. We sit on the porch. We eat dinner and talk about nothing important. But in every small moment, I see the weight of everything we regained. Not just a brother, but a piece of time we thought was gone forever. I've learned something from all of this. People talk about closure like it's a finish line, something you cross and then you're free. But closure isn't an ending. It's realizing that even after the worst happens, life still finds a way to move. It bends, it reshapes, it continues. My brother isn't the same man who left, and I'm not the same brother who stayed. But somehow, between loss and return, between grief and healing, we found a way to exist again, side by side, quietly, without needing to explain. Every evening, when the sun dips low and the house fills with that golden light, I look at him and think about everything time stole. The birthdays, the laughter, the ordinary days. But I also think about what time gave back, this second chance. It's not perfect. It's not enough to replace what was lost. But it's something. And sometimes, something is everything. He was gone for 25 years. The world called him dead. Last week, he knocked on my door, and I learned that some stories don't end when people say they do. Some lives outlast the graves built for them, and some brothers, no matter how long the silence lasts, always find their way home. For 25 years, they said he was gone. But I learned that death isn't always the end. Sometimes it's just a delay.